Till the end of the Gupta period, in the middle of the 6th century AD, the political history of India veered around a few important dynasties. The lesser political units did not usually come to the fore during this time. Samudragupta's Allahabad inscription refers to the existence of such units which lay submerged under the regional and pan-Indian units of the pre-Gupta and Gupta periods. As Professor Dilip Chakraborty points out, these multitude of political formations dominate attention in various areas in the post-Gupta context, at times these dynasties struggling for supremacy in both the north and the south. In the north, the feudatories of the Guptas carved out new fortunes for themselves, the two most prominent dynasties being the later Guptas of Magadh and the Maukharis of Kannauj. In the south, we hear of the Vakatakas and the Chalukyas of Badami, which were never, however, a part of the Gupta Empire. The Maitrakas of Vallabhi and the Pushyabhutis of Thaneswar were to rise to eminence towards the end of this period, which is now commonly known as early India. We start our discussion with the later Guptas of Magadh, who were a very well-known dynasty in northern India during this period. We will first look into their political achievements and also see how they managed to acquire for themselves a position of hegemony in northern India during this period.
The intermediary period between the fall of the imperial Guptas, the Huna invasions and the rise of Harsha in 7th century AD saw the rise of a number of powerful kingdoms in northern India. These were the later Guptas of Magadha, the Maukharis of Kannauj, the Pushyabhutis of Thaneshwar and the Maitrakas of Vallabhi. Now, for our sources of information regarding a study of these kingdoms, we have various epigraphic inscriptions like the Afsa inscription of Gaya, the Deorkar inscription, plus we also have references to these power struggles that ensued among them in Bana's Harsha Charita and Kadambari. Now, with regard to the later Guptas of Magadh, the first question that arises in our mind is, did the later Guptas of Magadh really have any familial link with the imperial Guptas? In other words, were the later Guptas really descendants of the imperial Guptas? Now, the names Kumaragupta and Devagupta occurring in both these ruling houses might suggest that the later Guptas of Magadh were probably direct descendants of the imperial Guptas. But on the other hand, we have other theories which prove just the opposite. For example, the panegyrists of the descendants of Kumaragupta never mention that there was any link between them, that is the later Guptas of Magadha, and the imperial Guptas. Certainly, these writers, who were constantly trying to eulogize their patrons, would obviously mention such a matter if it did exist. They would certainly try to connect them or link them to their illustrious ancestry, but they do not do so. So, all these theories, all these conjectures point to one thing, that in all probability the later Guptas of Magadh was an independent dynasty. It probably had some indirect connection with a smaller branch of the imperial Guptas, but it had an independent existence of its own, and it was an independent ruling house. And in all probability again, the later Guptas of Magadha had been the feudatories of the earlier imperial Guptas. And they asserted their independence during that period of political turmoil that set in after the Huna invasions. They tried to carve out an independent political niche, an independent political entity of their own during the 6th century AD. So, this is the conclusion that we can arrive at. Now, the various epigraphic inscriptions mention that there were about 10 or 11 rulers in all belonging to the later Gupta dynasty of Magadh. The founder of the later Gupta dynasty was, however, a person called Krishna Gupta, and he was probably not a very important ruler, because we hardly find any detailed account of his activities. The ruler who first becomes prominent in this dynasty was Kumaragupta III. And Kumaragupta III, during his reign, we find that there was the emergence of new power conflicts in northern India, and lot of newly risen powers, newly emergent political powers, they were now coming into rivalries with each other, and Kumaragupta III was caught in this vortex. In the first place, we have the name of the Gauras of Bengal. Now, the Gauras of Western Bengal so far had remained on the periphery. They had not shown any interest in mainstream politics of northern India. They lived on the territory, on the sea coast, and they had very little interest in North Indian politics. But suddenly, the Gauras of West Bengal were drawn into this power struggle. Secondly, there were the Andhras. The Andhras, especially under their great ruler Madhava Varman of the Vishnu Kundin dynasty. The Andhras were also similarly drawn into this vortex of power politics. Thirdly, we have a mention of the Sulikas. Now, who were the Sulikas? The Sulikas have been identified with the more famous name as the Chalukyas. The Sulikas were none else but the Chalukyas. So, thirdly, we have the Chalukyas. And lastly or fourthly, we have another very new emerging power in the region of Kannauj in the upper Ganges valley. They were the Maukharis. So, these were the four powers that were becoming very important from the time of Kumaragupta III, the Gauras of Bengal, the Andhras under their powerful leader Madhava Varman, the Maukharis of Kannauj in the upper Gangetic valley, and one must remember that this was a very fertile region from the agricultural point of view. Not only was it important from the point of view of agriculture, but it had some very important connecting trade routes. So, economically this was a very important region, and the Maukharis had come to dominate this region. So, this was the entire Gupta period, the entire later Gupta period, that is spanning from the 6th to the 7th century. And apart from the fact that this period saw the emergence of great power conflict among these various emerging kingdoms, we also notice that this was a period when agriculture really flourished. Economically, this was a very prosperous period. It did not see the decline of trade. North India did not witness the decline of trade in the post imperial Gupta period? No, and there was enough evidence to show that there was very intensive trade connection between, say for example, Persia and India, a fact that has been researched by historian Champaka Lakshmi, and she categorically states that there was some connection between Persia and India on the economic front. Another thing to remember about this period is that for the first time, two powers from eastern India, that is Kamarupa, which can be roughly corresponding with Assam now, Kamarupa and Gaura of West Bengal, these were for the first time moving gradually into central politics. They had for so long remained on the periphery, right? And Gaura, it commanded important rivers, and gradually it was beginning to be realized by the rulers of Gaura as well as Kamarupa that the upper Gangetic Valley was a very rich area, was a very fertile area. So there was a gradual desire on the part of these rulers to establish their sway over this region, because economically that was a very fertile region. So what conclusion can we arrive at? That these two powers no longer remained on the periphery, they were gradually moving into center, and a political rivalry was gradually beginning for the possession of the upper Gangetic Valley, and there was a shift of the peripheral power to the core area.
The Maukharis were a very ancient dynasty of northern India, and one finds mention of this dynasty as early as the 5th century BC in Panini's grammar, and also in Patanjali's Mahabhashya, which was composed in the 2nd century BC.
The Maukharis of Kannauj were originally the feudatory generals in Magad and Rajputana. They claimed their descent from the epic hero Ashwapati. Now, this was possibly an indirect allusion to the fact that their original profession was cavalry officers or cavalry soldiers. Hence, the use of the name Ashwapati or Lord of the Horse. Now, the first important Maukhari king was Ishana Varman, who held the imperial title Maharaja Dhiraja. This is significant because it indicated an imperial ambition in them, which was probably not present in the policies of the later Guptas of Magadha. Now, from a record dating 554 AD, we know that Ishana Varman won a number of victories over the Andhras, the Sulikas or the Chalukyas, and the Gauras. Now, apart from Ishana Varman, we also come across the names of three other Maukhari rulers. They were Sara Varman, Avanti Varman, and Groha Varman. Groha Varman was killed in an ensuing battle between Devagupta and the Maukharis, and his widow Rajyashri was now put in the prison of Kannauj. However, the death of Groha Varman was avenged by his brother-in-law Rajyavardhan. But eventually the rulers of Thaneshwar, that is the Pushyabhuti rulers of Thaneshwar, and the Maukharis were outwitted and defeated by King Shashanka, the king of Gaura. Not much is known about the cultural activities of the Maukhari rulers. We do know that there was large agricultural expansion during this entire period. There was agricultural surplus, and the most important factor that emerges is that the importance of Kannauj as a prime location in the middle Ganga Valley was gradually being realized by the rulers of northern and eastern India. That was the net result of the Maukhari rule over Kannauj during this period.
For nearly 100 years, the Vakatakas, with their capital at Nandivardhan, ensured peace and tranquility over central India and also re-established the orthodox social structure which had suffered considerable battering at the hands of the Kushanas and the Yavanas.
Even before the Guptas had established themselves as a power to reckon with in northern India based at Pataliputra, the Vakatakas had already established themselves in what is now known as the Deccan region south of the Narmada and gave peace and consolidation of power and authority in that region for almost 200 years. There were two dynasties or two branches of the Vakatakas, and together they ruled over the Trans Narmada region for 200 years. It was normally believed that the Vakatakas were a northern dynasty as the Puranas had mentioned it, and K. P. Jaiswal also formulated that they ruled at a place called Vakataka, but no such place had been discovered as yet, and the first time the word Vakataka appears was on a 3rd century AD pillar found at Amaravati. There are some distinctive marks which help us to understand that the Vakatakas were not a northern power, because unlike the Guptas, they did not issue any coins. Our information on the Vakatakas is based mostly on epigraphic sources. One school of historians believe that the Vakatakas were Brahmin in origin and that their Gotra name was Vishnu Briddhi. According to the Besim plates, a Vakataka king was known as Gautami Putra, and that induces us to believe that the Vakatakas were a Brahman origin. The formal establishment of Vakataka power was sometime between 284 and 265 AD, and the first known ruler of the dynasty was Vindha Shakti. According to the inscriptions, Vindha Shakti performed the Vedic sacrifices, which was the prevailing tradition of the times. He was succeeded by his son Pravarasena. Pravarasena, it can be said, was the real founder of the dynasty. While Vindha Shakti ruled for around 25 years, Pravarasena had a long reign of 60 years, and Pravarasena made a number of conquests. The next important king is Rudrasena I, who ruled around 400 or even earlier than that, little earlier than that, and he was a contemporary of Samudragupta. The Vakatakas, who had already been a power to reckon with because of the alliance with the Varashiva Naga dynasty, Pravarasena took a wife from the Varashiva Naga dynasty. It is also believed that the Vakatakas had entered into matrimonial alliances with the Kadambas of Vanavasi. So, they were an established power, and the Gupta king Samudragupta understood that the Vakatakas would be a very useful ally in his designs against the Shakas. The next king of the dynasty, who had close relation with the Guptas, was Rudrasena II. Rudrasena II was married to Chandragupta Vikramaditya's daughter Prabhavati Gupta. As it so happened that Rudrasena died young, and Prabhavati Gupta, she became the regent, and it was through her that the Gupta influence was consolidated on the Vakataka realm. But it must be remembered that the Vakatakas never really gave up their identity, and there were many areas where the Guptas had been influenced by the Vakatakas. The Vakatakas definitely made a bid for imperialism, but imperialism eluded them. We can say the Vakatakas were not as powerful as the Guptas or as creative as the Guptas, but they have a number of cultural claims to make, and we must say that although they predate the Guptas perhaps, but they emulated their Gupta imperial allies in many of their activities. The Vakatakas were also patrons of art, patrons of literature, and many of their kings, like the Gupta kings, were also adept both in the Shastra and the Shastra, that is the weapons and the scriptures. And we find that Vakataka kings, they composed poetical works like Pravarasena too. He was famous for Setubandha, and Setubandha had been very highly acclaimed by many like authors like Dandin. It has also been said that Kalidasa spent a very significant part of his career in the Vakataka court, that he composed his Meghaduta in the Vakataka court. The Vakatakas were not just the imitators of the Guptas, they have made architectural contributions in their temples constructed at Tigawa and Nachna, and the Tigawa pillared hall of Tigwa, it represents an adaptation of the Indo-Persipoli style, and the caves of Ajanta, some of the caves of Ajanta were also decorated with paintings and decorated with great images of the Buddha in the Dharma Chakra Pravartana Mudra. For instance, in one of the caves, cave number 16, 17, 19 and 21 definitely date to the Vakataka times, and it is because of this great achievements of the Vakatakas in literature, in architecture, that Ramesh Chandra Mujumdar and A.S. Altekar, they would like to describe the age as a Vakataka Gupta age. So we find the Vakatakas were not just a bridge kingdom, they were not just the transmitters of the Gupta culture, but they had their own contributions to make, and definitely they emulated their Gupta contemporaries, their Gupta allies in many ways, that there was a Brahmanization of the region which came with the gradual peasantization of the tribes, the expansion of the agricultural work. Definitely there was this Brahmanical influence, but we must say that Prakrit or the regional culture was also assimilated during the Vakataka reign.
While the Vakatakas ensured peace and prosperity over central India, their contemporaries in the Deccan were the imperial Chalukyas of Badami. For about 2 centuries, extending from the middle of the 6th century to the middle of the 8th century, the Chalukyas ruled over extensive regions in the Deccan. They were the earliest of the various branches of this dynasty. In the first quarter of the 7th century AD, Pulakesin II founded the Eastern Chalukya dynasty at Pishtapura. The Chalukyas of Vemulvada were initially the feudatories of the Rashtrakutas, but they later became independent. The Rashtrakutas were finally overthrown by the Western Chalukyas in 973 AD.
From about the middle of the 6th to the middle of the 8th century, an extensive area of the Deccan were under the Chalukyas of Badami. The other branches being the Chalukyas of Vengi, the Chalukyas of Vemulvar, who were the feudatories of the Rashtrakutas, and the later Chalukyas of Kollani, who overthrew the Rashtrakutas in 973 AD. Sources for their study include inscriptions engraved on stone slabs, pillars and copper plates. There is little room for doubt that the Chalukyas were an indigenous Canarese family, and they claimed to be of Kshatriya origin. Swansang refers to Pulakesin as Kshatriya by birth. They have been variously identified with the Gujaras, the Chulika people of Uttarapatha, the Sogdians, the Shulkis of the Haraha inscriptions, who have been identified with the Shulkis of Orissa. The Chalukyas, moreover, have claimed that they are Haritiputtas of the Manabba Gotra. Their family god was Vishnu, but we know that they patronized Jain and Shaiva sects, and some of them also adopted the religion. the first important ruler of the family was Pulokesin first. His dates are 535 to 66 AD. He was the first Maharaja of the family and may be considered as the real founder. He fortified the hill of Badami into a strong fortress in 543-4 AD. One of the first exploits of Pulokesin was the overthrow of the Kadambas from their capital Vanavasi. Then the Alupas of South Kannada and the Gongas of Mysore were forced to surrender. The Gongo king Durbinito gave his daughter in marriage to Pulokesin, and she became the mother of the next king Vikramaditya I. The Morjos of North Konkan were once again forced to submit by an attack on their capital at Puri, which has been referred to as the Lokki of the Western Ocean. The fame of Pulokesin's arms and the news of Harsha's growing power induced the Latos, the Malavas and the Gongos to offer their submission, and in this way Pulokesin's boundary in the north extended to the river Mahi. Now, when Harsha sought to invade the Deccan, Pulokesin met him on the bank of the Narmada and defeated him. This was the first time that the mighty northern emperor was defeated in the hands of a southern enemy. The Chalukyas are known to have been great patrons of art and architecture. While formerly scholars were of the opinion that they just imitated the Pallava style, but now it has been recognized that they had a unique creative style of their own. Badami, the royal seat of the Chalukyas, contains a number of shrines which are both excavated and structural and are of singular interest for architectural details. More important are the 3 caves excavated at Badami. They are beautiful cave temples. Though the facade is very plain, the interior is renowned for the architectural designs and sculptures. In the interior we find pillars of various designs and a profusion of sculptures and carvings. It has been claimed that the Chalukyas sculptors were great creators of Hindu iconography. In this connection, we may also mention Jaina caves at Badami and Aihole, both of which appear to have been dated from about the middle of the 7th century AD. Some Buddhist caves were also excavated by the Chalukyas. Besides Aihole, there are temples at Badami and Pattadakal. Vinayaditya built the magnificent temple of Shiva under the name Vijayeshwar at Pattadakal in Badami district.
The rivalry between the later Guptas and the Mokharis and the consequent participation of Gaur and Kamrup in the political race was definitely for the mastery over the most fertile region of the country, the Ganga Valley. The Mokharis fell, but their capital at Kannauj became the most coveted possession for any aspirant of political domination in northern India because of its prime location in the middle Ganga Valley.